Because today let's talk about CI task number 1. To me, this is the most important task on the CI exam. It's absolutely fundamental to most of the rest of the tasks. You have to do a pickup, you have to do 6 false casts or 3 false casts or whatever, and then make some kind of a delivery cast, whether it be a tailing loop or a narrow loop in the back, or a reach mend, wiggle mend, slack line cast. It doesn't matter. You got to do a pickup and you have to do some nice casts. So the other reason this is really important is because it's the first impression your examiner gets of you. If your first impression is crappy, then you're in trouble. And I can tell you this from having looked at an awful lot of tests and tested a lot of people and actually observed a lot of people being tested. Anybody who just nails task number 1 is highly unlikely to fail this test. Anybody who has trouble with task number 1 is in big trouble. They're gonna, even if they're shaky, if they get a pass minus, the problem is that if you've got a pass minus, that you barely pass this, they don't quite give you a borderline, or they give you a borderline, you're not gonna pass this test because you're gonna get preoccupied with your reach mend, for instance. You're gonna forget about your pickup and your loop. And when you forget about your pickup and your loop, they're gonna go to pot, and it won't matter how good your reach mend is, you're gonna fail the task because your pickup and your loops are bad. So every single task has to be good pickups and good loops. So what we're going to do today is just talk a little bit about the mechanics of the pickup and the false casting and laying it back down again. And I kind of divide it into a couple different parts. And this may sound kind of goofy, but at the beginning of every single task, the first thing you have to do is lay your line down straight. And I see people laying their line down with all kinds of gyrations. So when you're resetting the line, every time you reset the line on every single task, do it as cleanly, as neatly, and as precisely as you can. Don't sit there and make a bunch of mistakes. If you've just got done with a wiggle mend or your slack line cast and you've got a bunch of slack and you've got this thing here, don't sit here and fight it trying to get it out there. Just bring it back, do your roll cast pickup, and lay it down. And lay it down nice and neat and straight with your rod tip down every single time. That's going to be important. You want to start every single task, except obviously the roll cast, with your rod tip down and your line straight. Now let's talk about the rod tip down part for this task. For 40 feet of line for task number 1, the idea is there's a lot of bias against you starting here. And the reason is that most examiners view this as slack, and it is slack, but because you've got such a short amount of line, you could actually get away with this because you can straighten the slack out before you run out of casting arc. But you should be in the habit of starting down here all the time, because if you have 50 or 60 feet, and that's a question I would ask you if you're on a CI exam, why is it that we're asking you to have your rod tip down? And the answer is, well, because there's slack when you pick it up. Well, that's true, but if I have 5 feet of line out, slack doesn't really matter. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the biggest single thing we can talk about is, because if you watch this, I can have a pretty good pickup starting right here. That pickup's not a bad pickup, even though I start here. And the reason is I don't need a lot of casting arc. But what if I have 60 feet of line and I start here? Man, I'd have to get my rod way back to here. I'm not even going to get that slack out of my line until I get to here. My fly's going to hit the water behind me. So the idea is, it's the correct answer to say there's slack. And that's why you want to have it down here, even though you don't actually need it down here. So get your line down, flat, rod tip down. Okay, so let's talk about some drills you can do. The first drill is just practice. Practice having your line screwed up, roll cast pickup, put it down. Fly almost hit the cone. Okay, just practice that. Practice it with wiggle mends. Just practice so that you're always used to that. We don't want to do what I just did. You do this, get that thing up in the air. So now we've got that. We're going to get the line down, rod tip down every time we have a nice reset. Now let's go back to what are we going to do as far as the pickup itself. The pickup itself is smooth from the very beginning. So let's do the pickup and just talk about the mechanics. What you're going to do on this pickup is just simply lift your rod and just nice and smooth, just keep lifting it until you get back to where your nail knot starts to come off the ground. And you're going to just keep going at that angle and stop when your nail knot, so it's just going to be here. So you'll see my rod stops pretty much, from my viewpoint, it looks like about 1 o'clock, and I'm not sure what it looks like from the camera's point of view, but that's the pickup. Some of them are going to be a little bit different. Some of them are going to be a slightly larger or smaller, but all of them are going to be pretty much the same and perfectly acceptable if you're picking up and stopping just nice and smooth and stop as the nail knot comes off the ground. So I don't even have to look at my loop to know that those are pretty good. So the second thing you want to do is you want to practice just doing nothing but pickups. Just pick up and lay down, pick up and lay down over and over and over again. And just concentrate on watching that fly and stopping. Now what we're going to do is you got to think about the transition. When you get done stopping back here, if you're not back, if you're at 2 o'clock, you're probably okay. You're still going to need a slightly downward trajectory on your first forward cast, or you're going to have to drift, one of the two. If you want to drift a little bit, that's probably just good, because if you stop at 1:30, you drift back to 2, and then you start going from 10 to 2, you're going to get a nice level casting plane. If, however, your trajectory is going to be level, it's going to make it easier for some of your other tasks. If, however, you get to 1:30 and you don't want to do that because you're not very good at drifting, that's fine. All you got to do now is you're going to have to go, instead of to 10 o'clock, you're going to have to go to about 9:30, which means you've got a slightly downward trajectory on your forward cast. Then you're going to have to just gradually adjust it so it comes up more level if you want to have a really good presentation on some of the other casts. So let me show you what I do. I drift just a little bit. And then I try to make sure I get pretty level. If you don't want to drift, then what you have to do, see, it's a little bit downward trajectory on your first cast. But then come back up. I don't like this because it tends to make my back loop a little bigger than it normally would be while I'm coming up. But you're going to have to figure out how to do that on your own. But the thing is, you're going to have to understand that at some point in time, the pickup is going to be the most critical thing, and then probably the first false cast forward is going to be critical, because that's the most likely cast to cause a problem with a tailing loop. At least that's what I've seen over the years.